The Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess of the Subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Step by Step, the Artemis Program and NASA's Path to Human Exploration of the Moon, Mars, and beyond. And with that, I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Welcome to the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee's first hearing of the 119th Congress. I extend my warm welcome to our ranking member, Congresswoman Fucci from the state of North Carolina, and express my enthusiasm to work with her and her team and the returning members of this subcommittee. 2026 will be a defining year for the legacy of the United States. Next April, NASA is set to launch Artemis II, a mission sending American astronauts into orbit around the moon for the first time in 50 years. If we succeed, we will clear the path for Artemis III in 2027, when American astronauts will once again step onto the lunar surface and plant the stars and stripes. This is the most significant moment of America's space program since the Apollo program. We stand at a crossroads. The world is watching, and our competitors, like Communist China, are racing to beat us there. We cannot afford to fall behind. This is an opportunity to prove that America still leads the world in exploration and innovation. Failure is not an option. To succeed, we need the same relentless pace and ironclad determination today as we won the space race back in the 1960s. With each mission, NASA tested new systems, tackled new challenges, and carried us one step closer to Neil Armstrong's great giant leap for mankind. At the height of the Apollo program, NASA launched 7 crewed missions in less than 2 years. That achievement was fueled by patriotism, urgency, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief in American greatness. Returning to the moon has not been without its challenges. Over the years, changing directions and requirements have resulted in schedule delays and cost overruns. Not only must we return to the moon and establish a presence, but we must do it while spending significantly less money than the Apollo missions. That makes every taxpayer dollar given to NASA precious. We aim to get the Artemis program back on track. Thanks to President Trump, NASA has a clear direction. Now that we must ensure that NASA carries out that direction in the most efficient and cost-effective means possible. I plan to conduct close oversight to ensure that every dollar NASA spends moves us closer to the moon and to Mars. We must remember that we are in a race to the moon and that there are consequences for coming in second. The Chinese Communist Party has set its sights on landing on the moon by 2030. The nation must establish a foothold there and will shape the norms of behavior for generations of exploration on the lunar surface. I refuse to let the communist dictatorship set the rules for the future of space. Now is not the time for half measures. The next few years are critical to our national interests and our place in the world. We are in a race to the moon, and America must win that race. Our journey to the moon is in service to a greater goal, one that President Trump outlined in his inaugural address, to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. Since 2005, Congress has backed a step-by-step path to human exploration with Mars as the ultimate goal. A mission to Mars will be the defining moment of our era. It will be longer and even more difficult than a lunar landing, which is why we must prepare ourselves for the journey. The moon is our critical stepping stone, a proving ground to test technologies, refine operations, and reduce risks for future Mars missions. Every step we take towards the moon is a giant leap towards Mars. To my fellow Americans, you deserve to know where your dollars are spent wisely. We will conduct careful oversight to ensure that NASA operations at the highest standards, and we will settle for nothing less than efficiency, productivity, and results. This is a chance to remind ourselves that what we are capable of when we are united behind a shared goal. Mars is on the horizon, but the moon is where we first prove ourselves. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today, and let's get to work. With that, I would like to recognize our ranking member from the state of North Carolina, Congresswoman Fucci, and you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am thrilled to serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics. We are at an exciting time, and I look forward to working with you and the members of the subcommittee and full committee to continue our bipartisan and critical work on ensuring a strong and vibrant future for civil space and aeronautics. Before we turn to the hearing, I want to first welcome our expert witnesses and thank you for being here to discuss Artemis and NASA's human exploration of the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Through the Artemis initiative, we'll land the first woman, first person of color, and the first international partner astronaut on the surfaces of the Moon. And I am so proud that Christina Cook, who attended high school in my district, North Carolina's 4th, will be a part of this historic Artemis II crew, marking the first return of humans to the lunar vicinity in over half a century. Artemis will advance our scientific understanding, test capabilities needed for sustained lunar activities, assess resources on the Moon, and help us prepare for an eventual groundbreaking human mission to Mars. Artemis is also attracting commercial innovation to advance these and other U.S. lunar activities. Importantly, under Artemis, the United States of America, in hand with our international partners, will lead and shape standards, responsible behaviors, and best practices consistent with the peaceful exploration and safe utilization of outer space. In 2022, NASA successfully launched the Artemis I uncrewed demo mission that provided essential test data, including on the Orion heat shield. Artemis II preparations are well underway for a crewed demonstration to fly by the far side of the Moon next year. Even today, as we are holding this hearing, a NASA-supported commercial lunar lander, the second to launch in just 2 months, is sitting on the launch pad ready to lift off. Both commercial landers carry NASA instruments and will attempt to set down on the lunar surface in early March. Despite these important milestones, NASA's Artemis campaign is not without challenges, including technical complexities, affordability, and schedule delays. We can and we must seek improvements and corrections, and I mean with a scalpel, not a chainsaw, if we are serious about returning to the Moon with humans successfully again. It will take all of us working together to achieve regular, measurable progress and to ensure that it is done so safely. To that end, I am disappointed that NASA chose not to send a witness to testify today, despite being invited. I certainly hope such practice does not continue. Full transparency with Congress and the American public on an effort as important as Artemis is of the utmost importance. But these are not normal circumstances. At a time when China is laser focused on sending technonauts to the Moon by 2030, I cannot pretend today that the chaos, confusion, and cruelty levied on our federal government workforce by the Trump administration and its destructive executive actions, including the threat of mass firings, will not negatively impact the United States and our standing around the world, or its efforts to return our astronauts, American astronauts, to the surface of the Moon, and to do so before China. I will not sit idly by and let our federal government, including NASA, a national crown jewel, be destroyed, nor will I stand for handing the keys to lunar exploration to China. Doing so jeopardizes our economic and national security and our geopolitical influence. It also risks the space research, technology, and services on which we rely on here on Earth. We must protect and enable these essential capabilities as we also seek to push the boundaries of human exploration and activity beyond low Earth orbit. To the NASA workforce, I want you to know that you are valued. We cannot accomplish NASA's inspiring and historic national endeavors without you. As a ranking member of this subcommittee, I commit to keeping NASA workforce top of mind as we work to reauthorize NASA. You are our most important national asset. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Fushi. Also, for the record, before we move on, I would like to request unanimous consent to submit 2 letters for the record. The first is from Space Frontier Foundation, and the second is from Coalition for Deep Space Exploration. Without objection, so ordered. Next, I would, of course, like to welcome our chairman, Chairman Babin. Thank you very much for being here. And with that, I recognize the chairman for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. After serving at the helm of this subcommittee for so many years, it's going to take a hearing or two to get used to sitting way down here at this end. But today's hearing is especially important as America stands on the verge of returning to the lunar surface. And as the proud representative of NASA's Johnson Space Center, it is also a topic that is very near and dear to me. Space exploration is not a task for the faint of heart. American astronauts have accomplished great feats in space. They have built space stations, operated the space shuttle, and of course walked on the moon. However, these programs are significant undertakings both in time and in resources. In 2005, Congress directed NASA to develop a sustained human presence on the moon as a stepping stone to future exploration of Mars and other destinations. The name and format of the program NASA would use to accomplish this goal changed with time. But in each of the authorization acts that followed over the years, Congress consistently directed NASA to pursue an incremental approach, using intermediate destinations to develop extensible technologies that would enable humans to explore the moon, Mars, and beyond. Given the time and resource-intensive nature of any space mission, successfully carrying out a crewed space exploration program requires that the government maintain continuity of purpose over the course of several years. Changing direction isn't free, and it is incredibly taxing on the United States industrial base. For years, as it evolved from the Constellation program to SLS and Orion, even to an asteroid redirect mission, America's space program has lacked a clear and consistent path. And that is why I was honored to be at President Trump's side when he signed Space Policy Directive 1, more commonly known as SPD-1, in December of 2017. This update to United States national space policy instructed NASA to partner with the commercial sector and international community to return humans to the moon and eventually push toward Mars. SPD-1 aligned with the congressional directions set forth in previous NASA authorization bills and outlined a clear, reachable goal that injected a new sense of urgency and excitement into NASA's mission. To ensure the viability of the Artemis program and the efforts of our commercial and international partners, Congress cannot accept unnecessary cost overruns or schedule delays. We will continue to evaluate the proposed architecture regularly and provide rigorous oversight to ensure that the program remains on track. With the CCP planning to send taikonauts to the moon's south pole by the end of this decade, the stakes are too high for us to fail. We cannot afford to let them beat us. And as I've stated many, many times before, one of my greatest concerns is that NASA astronauts will arrive on the lunar surface only to be greeted by a sign that says "No trespassing" in Mandarin. Our nation is uniquely suited to provide leadership on the moon with our commercial and international partners. And additionally, the United States will maintain openness and transparency in its operations on the lunar surface, something that we can be certain the CCP will not. We came close to sending a NASA authorization bill to the President's desk late last year. Soon, this committee will once again consider legislation to provide NASA with continued direction for human exploration and many other topics. I look forward to working with my colleagues on the committee and our counterparts in the Senate to finish the job this year. We have a great panel of witnesses, and I want to thank both of them for being here today. who are no strangers to this committee, and I thank them for sharing their expertise with us, and I look forward to a very productive discussion today. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now I recognize the ranking member of the full committee for a statement. Thank you, Ranking Member Lofgren. You are recognized.
Well, thank you, Chairman Herodopoulos and Ranking Member Fushi, for holding this hearing to review NASA's Artemis initiative. And I want to welcome the witnesses back to the committee. We appreciate you being here. We're all excited about NASA's Artemis campaign, and we support our Moon to Mars program, and we want the United States to succeed in reestablishing a lunar program in preparation for the even more ambitious goal of being the first to step foot on Mars. Congress has, through successive NASA authorization acts, reaffirmed a continuity of purpose for our nation's human exploration activities, providing a steady hand in directing a stepping-stone approach to human exploration of the Moon, Mars, and even beyond. While important, continuity of purpose alone will not get us to the Moon and Mars. NASA needs sufficient resources, the necessary workforce and skills, safe and modern infrastructure and facilities, and a viable Artemis architecture couched in technical confidence. With each of these requirements, I'm afraid there are more questions than answers. We don't know NASA's funding levels after the continuing resolution runs out on March 14th, just a short few days from now, and whether it will continue at fiscal year 2024 levels or under a fiscal year 2025 appropriation. We don't know if NASA will have the workforce and skills to advance Moon to Mars after President Trump's wrecking ball of destructive executive actions that has led to deferred resignations, threats of layoffs, and a remaining NASA workforce that may be scared, distracted, and demoralized. We don't know when a Trump administration fiscal year 2026 budget proposal that lays out the administration's priorities and proposed funding for NASA will arrive, and whether it will include funding to rebuild aging and unsafe infrastructure or modernize research facilities. And we don't know when the agency will have a Senate-confirmed administrator and deputy administrator to articulate the Trump administration's priorities for NASA. Finally, we don't know if Artemis 3 and the future human landing approaches with their highly complex human landing systems and low technical readiness levels could be viable on a time frame that will ensure NASA astronauts land at the lunar South Pole and return safely to Earth, we hope in advance of China's taikonauts. With that, Mr. Chairman, I do hope you will consider holding another hearing once we have a NASA official to testify and the remaining pieces of the puzzle that I've just listed. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to our witnesses' testimony and their insights. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Let me next introduce our witnesses today. Our first witness today is Dr. Scott Pace, the Director of Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. And our next witness is Dr. Daniel Dumbacher, who serves as an adjunct professor at Purdue University. I now recognize Dr. Pace for 5 minutes to present his testimony. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Chairman Herodopoulos, Ranking Member Fushi, and the distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you very much for holding this important hearing. As maybe a point of personal interest, I'd also like to acknowledge my friend George Whiteside's newly elected to this Congress, so he's making me feel old. I remember when we were both much younger in the space advocacy community, but congratulations, sir. As a new Congress and a new administration provide a timely opportunity to consider the American space enterprise, and in particular the role of human space exploration in service of U.S. national interests. I have a written statement, ask permission to be included in the hearing record, and will endeavor to keep my remarks brief. We know space is vitally important to the United States, but the space domain is not subject to the kind of direct control possible with land, sea, or air domains. So how can the United States protect its interests and values? The answer, in part, is through international leadership. During the Apollo era, we sought to show what the United States and only the United States could do in space. Today, leadership is about having other countries wanting to work with you, to be a partner in common endeavors. We need to shape activities in the space domain in a manner conducive to the interests of the United States, its allies, and like-minded partners. Space exploration is expensive and takes effort over many years. Space policy, therefore, needs to be consistent and sustainable, and to do so, that policy must be aligned with enduring national interests. I believe we have good space policies today, but we face serious implementation challenges. The immediate challenges for U.S. space exploration include ensuring more than one way of getting Americans to orbit, managing the end of the International Space Station, enabling one or more private space stations, creating a sustainable return to the Moon, and building the capabilities to place Americans on Mars. I'd like to share two concerns for human space exploration. First, we should pay attention to geopolitical considerations and competition in order to ensure that our efforts support those larger national interests. The Artemis program is not a military program, but it supports national security purposes by shaping the way nations behave in space. The rules of the space environment will be made by those who show up, not those who stay behind. The United States landed on the Moon over 55 years ago, but today we are at risk of seeing Chinese astronauts on the Moon before we're able to return. But more than being first, we need to have a sustainable lunar presence, sustainable technically, economically, politically. Norway was the first to reach the South Pole, but today it is the United States that puts some 3,000 people on the ice each year. And through its presence, the United States shapes and guides the Antarctic Treaty System for that remote continent today. Second, the U.S. leadership, to be effective, human space exploration missions cannot be one and done, but must be repeatable and sustainable with continuous presence as the norm. These conditions lead to space architectures whose elements are routinely reusable, in-space utilities, power, communications, navigation, advanced biomedical knowledge, and the use of in-space resources, such as water, ice, and asteroids. The technologies and practices needed for Mars can and should benefit operations in low Earth orbit and the Moon. The current Artemis program presents many challenges. A primary concern is the Space Launch System, which is expensive and not reusable. It's had one flight, but has trouble meeting the congressional target of 2 cores per year. It's time to consider alternatives from going to the Earth to the Moon and back. Ideally, NASA should be able to buy heavy lift services to send payloads to the Moon. A revised Artemis campaign plan should be a high priority for the new administrator. There may be some painful adjustments with industry and our international partners, but it's, excuse me, but it's better to do so now than to continue on an unsustainable and unaffordable path. The Artemis policy is a good one, supported by Congress and multiple administrations. However, we need a more sustainable and credible approach to maintain the confidence of the White House, Congress, industry, and our international partners. Thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. I now recognize Mr. Dumbacher for 5 minutes to present his testimony. You're recognized.
Thank you, Committee Chairman Babin, Ranking Member Lofgren, Subcommittee Chairman Herodopoulos, and Ranking Member Fushi, and also subcommittee members for the opportunity to discuss the need for the United States to retain and grow its leadership in space. I refer to my written testimony submitted for this hearing. I am a proud civil servant to the Constitution, a long-term NASA senior executive in human space exploration, most recently the CEO of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and currently a professor of engineering practice at Purdue University. From my experience, I have learned it's about doing the right thing at the right time. Therefore, the discussion is not Moon or Mars. Rather, timing dictates that we must first master the Moon and then proceed to Mars. I say this because we are at a key crossroads for U.S. leadership in space. Our global competitors, primarily China and its allies, are outplanning and outpacing us in their drive to become dominant in space. This is a critical national security and economic concern. This is about the long-term drive to be present, to lead, and become the first to establish the rules of the road, thus mastering the cislunar domain for the purposes of science, exploration, and commercial development. Today's race is about continuous presence, values, and technical leadership. The nation that leads is the nation that benefits. China is striving to lead the implementation and development of the infrastructure, retaining the high ground and reaping the economic benefit. China has declared that they will land humans on the Moon before 2030. Of note, China has met every space milestone they have proposed within plus or minus a year. The United States must protect our potential economic opportunity, protect our national security, lead the building of the necessary infrastructure, and importantly, lead chartering the rules of the road. We must continue to lead the coalition between the Earth and the Moon, and we must bring international and commercial partners along with us. NASA's current plan to return people to the Moon requires approximately 35 to 40 Starship launches to first demonstrate the capability on an uncrewed mission and then execute the first human mission planned for Artemis 3. I ask this: can 40 launches, development and demonstration of the undeveloped and undemonstrated on-orbit rocket fuel station, and integration of a complex operational scenario across multiple systems all successfully occur by 2030? The probability of success for this plan is remote at best. Further, the United States does not have a sustainable plan for 2030 and beyond. We need to recognize the competitive environment, admit our true technical status and capability, provide the needed effort for success, and engage our international partners. Private enterprise space capabilities have grown tremendously in the last decade and are driving our progress with government and private investment. We must continue to grow this competitive power. Our workforce across industry, academia, and government, our national asset, must be explicitly supported and grown. Today's workforce is in turmoil when we need them the most. Our strength is tapping into the talent across our society, clearly showing people the opportunity for their own lives, stability, real challenging objectives to be accomplished, and real problems to be solved will keep this workforce engaged and learning, all to accomplish the future. Unnecessary workforce turmoil allows China additional advantage. I offer the following recommendations. 1. Return humans to the Moon as expeditiously as possible by utilizing flight-tested existing systems, such as the Space Launch System, Orion spacecraft, and existing international partnerships. This will require extreme focus by the NASA Industry Artemis team for the goal of returning to the Moon by 2030, assuring the most efficient and technically rigorous efforts are accomplished. Recommendation 2, in parallel, utilizing the growing private space capabilities, government and academia immediately initiate the planning and implementation of the sustainable and efficient approach to retain the United States presence on the Moon, assuring our national security and future economic opportunity consistent with national priorities and policy and the National Academy's decadal surveys. 3, focus the NASA industry workforce on accomplishing the national objectives with real timelines and incentives to incorporate new capabilities from across industry, academic labs, and government labs with urgency and focus. Congress must assure the funding, recommendation 4. Congressmen must assure the funding and policy stability along with the program sustainability to encourage the best and brightest of our people across our society to lead and implement this critical enterprise for our national security and economic opportunity. Thank you for your kind attention and this opportunity to speak. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to both witnesses for testifying today. I now reserve for myself 5 minutes for questions. My first question is, each Artemis mission is a complex web of interdependent systems. I would ask Dr. Pace first. In your view, would any changes to the current Artemis mission architecture get us there faster, or are there more likely to be delays in our return to the Moon?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. One of the things I said in my testimony is I think we need to have a sort of a more immediate campaign plan. The architecture itself, I think the idea of using public-private partnerships for going to low Earth orbit, landing on the Moon, all of that, I think that is basically fine. The policy direction is fine. Where I was particularly pointing at is the need for more sustainable, more reusable systems for going from the Earth to the Moon, which is why I talk about having an on-ramp, if you will, for alternative heavy lift options. The Artemis 2 and 3 cores are already under construction, being built. I wouldn't propose really changing that. I think trying to change that and do something else would produce more delays and would push us past 2030. But as I look beyond that, the next Artemis 2 and 3 missions, maybe 4, we should be thinking about other alternatives we can have to have that sustainable presence. So the first is, can we get back to the Moon, faster? Tons of things to do to work on that, as Dr. Dumbacher says. And then the question is, be able to sustain that and be there over time. That's going to require, I think, changes in what we do and bringing on new capabilities that we do not currently have.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. And Mr. Dumbacher, a second question. As the committee has noted, NASA's faced a lot of challenges with Artemis. What lessons could we learn from our private partners who've had so much success over the last few years?
One of the lessons we can learn that would be most beneficial would be applying the rapid urgency and focus that we see from our private companies, the ability to solve and rectify problems in a very timely manner, decision velocity being much increased so that it doesn't take, we get decisions in short weeks and not months, which all goes to cost and all goes to affordability. The other changes I would propose is that, similar to Dr. Pace, is let's use the, as I say it, the tools in the toolbox we already have, the hardware online with Artemis, and we might have to build a lander. We might have to scale down the current lander opportunities, examples that we have in work, so that we get to that 2030 landing. But most importantly is get the decision velocity dramatically increased and get the efficiency and the urgency and focus clear all throughout the program.
My next question is, how can the U.S. continue to leverage commercial partnerships to outpace international rivals in lunar exploration and beyond, Dr. Pace?
I think that's really one of the key things in Space Policy Directive 1. The President put in commercial and international partnerships because it represents a very different way of doing business today than it did during the Apollo program. So we need our international partners to shape the environment. We need commercial partners to actually provide the innovation necessary to, in an affordable and sustainable way, make progress toward the Moon and Mars. I think the partnership there is not just simply one of money going back and forth and who builds what, but also in terms of just cutting down the kind of regulatory oversight that doesn't really always add value. You have small companies around the U.S. who'd be happy to build a couple of hydrogen valves for us, but really don't because the paperwork is just ridiculous and they just really can't do it. There are a lot of reforms that the DoD is looking at in terms of acquisition. Those similar kind of reforms are ones that NASA looks at in acquisition, because what we need to do is shape an industrial base that provides the capability for the United States to explore and go where it wants, when it wants. And one of the things really standing in the way is ourselves, the way we do business. The old styles that we did business that worked, I think, during Apollo, Shuttle, and even Station, are not ones that really work today. We need more commercial companies willing to work with the government and provide things to the government where, in many cases, they're not because of the burden that regulatory processes that we require impose on them. So we obviously need to have better transparency. It's not just buy and trust, but we need to find ways to reform the way we integrate and work with the private sector to get them to want to be part of us.
Thank you, Dr. Pace. And let me ask a blank question to Mr. Dumbacher. You mentioned a lot of these concerns. If Artemis doesn't work in 2026, as we all hope it will, what would you recommend we do?
First of all, I'm confident that Artemis 2 will work, knowing the technical workforce that's behind it and making it happen. It's a matter of doing it quicker and getting to Artemis 3 quicker. I think right now our problem is because of our lander designs and other opportunities, we have developed this complex multiple launch scenario that keeps us from getting humans to the Moon by 2030. And so what we need to fix is how we execute Artemis 3 and get Artemis 2 flying as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. And with that, I now recognize our ranking member from North Carolina for 5 minutes for questions. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am proud that North Carolina-raised Christina Cook has been named to the Artemis 2 crew and will be the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit. I am appalled that the Trump administration's attack on any effort to even acknowledge the underrepresentation of women and people of color in STEM fields, let alone addresses the issue. Mr. Dumbacher, why is it so important that our astronaut corps is representative of our nation and that NASA engages all Americans of every background in its mission?
Congresswoman Fushi, one of the things I learned very directly as the CEO of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and also one of the reasons I went back into teaching, is because it's about people need to see themselves and they need to see the opportunity. They need to know that people like them can accomplish and execute. And the more they see of that, the better it is. And it also is critical that those people and their support networks, their family, their friends, their relatives, also see that opportunity. So being representative of society, as the AIAA worked to do over the course of our strategic planning is absolutely critical so that all of our members of our society are engaged and included in what we do.
So a follow-up to that is, how will actions that turn away talent and discourage the next generation affect NASA's efforts to return humans to the moon and land the first astronauts on the surface of Mars? Many of the probationary employees who are being considered for layoffs are just getting started in their careers.
It is very much a concern, and in fact, over the weekend, I had the chance to talk with former students, NASA employees that are scared. They are concerned because of the turmoil. And believe me, they are some of the smartest people. I am more than happy to turn over the future to them. And they are concerned, and they see that, and they are actually questioning what are they going to do for their careers and looking at other opportunities, which I think is terribly sad because of the national imperative that we have and the global competition that we are engaged in. As Dr. Pace has discussed, and I have discussed, we are in a global competition. And if we don't take advantage of all of the talent across the society, across the U.S., then we do that, we give up that capability at our peril.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. Dr. Pace, in your written statement, you note that space leadership is about having other countries wanting to work with you to be a partner in common endeavors. I share your sentiment. However, recently, Mr. Musk abruptly asserted that the International Space Station, a beacon of international space cooperation between multiple nations, end operations 3 years earlier than planned so that we can go to Mars. Are you concerned about the impact of this type of comment, what it might have on our ISS partners, many of whom are also involved in Artemis?
So I saw the comment, and interesting. I guess I would say, first of all, that it's not really fully accurate in the sense that we've gotten all the value we can out of station. There's lots more value still to be had of doing research and work on board. Just as one example, the environmental life support system aboard Space Station is mostly closed. Over 90% of air and water is being recycled. They can do that for up to 3 years. That's important for going to Mars, and so being able to demonstrate life support systems for that. On the other hand, I would say that, that Mr. Musk has a point about being prepared to deorbit. We have problems aboard the Russian segment of the module. We have an air leak. I was woken up at 6:30 in the morning in 2019 to be told that there was, an air leak, and that we needed to pay attention to it, and we started worrying about crew safety. So this has been going on for a while. I have concerns about whether or not the station will, in fact, be safe and habitable. It is now, but whether that will be through to 2030. So I think it's wise to be prepared to come down sooner. I just don't think it's because there's not more to do. There's plenty to do. But we do need to be prepared to come down sooner if need be for safety reasons.
Thank you for that. A final comment. I have said before that the safety of NASA's astronauts is always top of mind for me and for everyone involved in overseeing our nation's space program. NASA is increasingly turning to commercial service models, rather, for human spaceflight. I believe it is critical for the agency to have well-crafted and targeted oversight procedures that can ensure its contractors are every bit as committed to a culture of safety as NASA itself. I wish that NASA had agreed to testify here today so that I could ask them directly, but I would like to still hear from you, Mr. Dumbacher, as you have had a long career in human spaceflight programs at NASA. How do you see NASA's ability to evaluate and ensure that its human spaceflight contractors maintain a robust safety culture commensurate with the risks of deep space exploration and the extremely high stakes, the lives of our astronauts?
And if you could please keep it brief.
Yes.
Thank you.
Certainly, astronaut safety is key. I wear today my silver Snoopy pin to recognize that. It's about appropriate oversight and insight, not overbearing. And getting to that right balance is the key. And we have drifted to overbearing, very risk averse, and we need to rebalance so that we get the proper insight at the proper risk and be able to move on with decision velocity quickly.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And now I recognize the representative from Florida, Congressman Webster, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing, and sounds like it's very important to be done right now. And Dr. Pace, you mentioned that the Artemis program needed revision, and you later said maybe it doesn't need that much revision. What does that entail?
I think that one of the primary things it entails is what do we do after Artemis 2 and 3. I think the Artemis 2 mission, as I say, I think is underway and keep going. Artemis, the other missions for landing, I think to beat the Chinese back, I think are fine. But I think looking beyond that, how do I make sure we're able to go back and forth, to the moon in a sustainable way and build up the capabilities necessary really to go to Mars. So I would say the immediate campaign plan, if you will, for the next several missions is going to be important to get there ahead of the Chinese. And then we need to be able to think, and how are we going to stay there in a way that's sustainable and affordable? So as I said, I think the policy direction is fine. I think the major elements are fine. We need alternatives for heavy lift in the case of the SLS, because it simply hasn't been able to produce enough of them, which the Congress has directed it to do, to provide more opportunities. And other than that, we got to go fly. We got to go get experience. And if we simply sit on the ground, we'll have a lot of hangar queens, but we won't really get the data that we need. So I think the program is at the point where it really is about to fly. It needs to fly more, and I'd like to see us get that experience.
So would you say that this would be a high priority for the new NASA administrator?
I think probably I would suggest that one of his highest priorities is to really get a group of people together and in fairly short order, not a year-long study, not another large effort, but to say, okay, what are we really going to do to meet the directions that the Congress and the White House have given to us? And if I may be so bold, I think you could come up with an answer in about 60 days or less. So people have all the reports necessary, and the data analysis is all sitting on the shelf now. It's a matter of that decision velocity, as Dr. Dumbacher said, to pull a lot of that stuff together and to really report back to you in the White House as to what needs to happen in the President's budget request, what needs to happen in the authorization bill, and if we're unfortunately suffer under a continuing resolution, what things to prioritize in that environment. So, because you all have some really important decisions to make.
Well, you've kind of answered that. The next question would be, what process would there be for revising the Artemis program? So that would be the idea of making haste, making it happen, making it fast. Is that correct?
Yes, because if we want to go to Mars, we have to learn a lot of things that are necessary for going to the moon. The step-by-step approach, the incremental approach that this committee has talked about, and really this Congress has supported since 2005, represents, I think, a bipartisan consensus that's, in fact, correct. We have to do a lot of work. There's no shortcut. There's no easy way to learn how to live and work and operate in space and get to Mars. So we have to do the work. And the sooner we do the work, the sooner we're going to get there.
Okay, well, I think you're right. Get to work. Thank you so much for your time. Reel back.
Thank you, Representative Webster. Next, we recognize the Congresswoman from California, Congresswoman Lofgren. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the witnesses for this thoughtful testimony. I am concerned about the impacts of the chaos of recent weeks on our NASA workforce. For example, I think that the 20-something hackers may not realize that when you get a merit-based promotion, you are put on probationary status for the merit-based new job. Those are the people targeted for layoffs, the people who are most meritorious. I mean, this is chaos. The NASA acting administrator said at a commercial space conference recently that NASA is focused on implementing the executive orders. Instead, I think that NASA's workforce needs to be focused on getting the NASA mission done. I see this firsthand from my constituents who work at Ames Research Center, which is outside my district, of course. But the chaos, the confusion, the whiplash, intimidation, and bullying of the workforce is agency and government-wide. And every day, NASA employees are worried that they or their colleagues are going to be arbitrarily fired, or they're reportedly getting told to hide pride stickers in their cubicles. They don't even know if the administration is going to tell them to abandon the moon altogether. And when it comes to Artemis, I'm also concerned about the unprecedented influence Elon Musk seems to have on strategic direction in this administration. Ranking members Fushi, Sykes, and I have sent letters questioning NASA on so-called DOGE and the potential conflicts of its leadership at NASA. And even though SpaceX has contracts worth billions for developing human landing systems for the return of our astronauts to the moon, Mr. Musk keeps talking about heading straight to Mars. Beyond the obvious fact that this approach could serve his personal interests, I think it's bad policy. And I'd like to ask both of you, Mr. Dumbacher and Dr. Pace, you're both experts. So please, in your opinions, why are we going to the moon while keeping our sights on Mars? And what would it mean to abruptly change the long-standing moon to Mars approach?
I will take it first and then turn it over to Dr. Pace. I think why we are going to the moon is to, as Scott has said, learn. It's also about making sure we are there and present for the long term to help establish the rules of the road, reap the economic benefits, and help retain the high ground. This is an important, we need to learn along the way, and we need to recognize that the global competition is occurring from the Earth to the moon and to the lunar surface. There is not a global competition yet for Mars, so we need to take the right thing at the right time. Moon first, then Mars.
Thank you very much for the question. I would say, well, first of all, leadership in space today is different than Apollo. Apollo is about look what we can do by ourselves. Today it's about look what we do that gets other people to want to be with us. I would also submit that the idea of going directly to Mars actually was already tried. It was tried during the Obama administration when they abandoned the moon and said, well, let's go to Mars. Of course, I was very critical of this, not because I was critical of Mars, but because I was critical of a program that I thought was disconnected from geopolitical reality. Other countries really couldn't cooperate with us. And so when SPD-1 was after it was signed, I had the opportunity to be in Tokyo at a major space meeting, and the tenor of the room was completely different. People were like, oh, we can do the moon. What do you need? How can we help? What can be part of it? Yes, they're with us on the idea of Mars as the goal and build forward to that. But to do that separate from where other people are, I think left the U.S. in a worse geopolitical position. Not intentional, but it left us in a worse position as a result. So I think while people can have their personal interests in how to go about space exploration, I think the national interest is one which really enhances the position of the United States, and the sequential steps that the Congress has laid out are, in fact, in those national interests.
So we need to put our national interest ahead of our personal interests, and I appreciate your insight, and I hope that our committee will maintain its bipartisan effort to support the plan that is workable in the national interest, is likely to beat our major competitor, China, and not go off on wild tangents that appear not to be well thought out. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the representative from Georgia, Mr. McCormick, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your new position. I am really excited to be here today and talk to you folks about what works. We are in increasingly difficult times when it comes to global competition. And even countries who are not traditionally known for space travel have done very well, with India putting a aircraft on the far side of the moon for under $100 million. I don't think we could get an organization together to talk about making a spaceship for under $100 million. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We can't get through the administrative process for that much money, let alone actually put metal together and put rocket fuel in something and actually get the technology to work we're not efficient at all. I think we'd all agree on that. And that's one of the reasons that we're falling behind China. You mentioned today about how we're falling behind China because they meet their marks. When they set a goal, they actually get there because, of course, they have a unified government because one person kind of calls the shots, and I get the efficiencies of that. But what I'm looking for is solutions because right now this doesn't affect just getting to the moon or getting to the Mars. This is the way we face intelligence and armed services. We're talking about EMPs. We're talking about space weapons. We're talking about the ability to defend ourselves and be on the offense when it's necessary to take out something that's going to harm American citizens. This is about everything that we hold near and dear. It's not just one thing. My question is, in a time where we're continuing to advance rapidly in the commercial industry, but we're falling way behind in every government contract we do, why aren't we turning to more outside-the-box thinking when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to when we can see one program's obviously failing, and then you got one man who's putting more spaceships into outer space than all other nations combined, and actually bails NASA out when we leave somebody stranded. Why aren't we doing better collaboration? And what can we do better specifically? I'll give you the first crack, Dr. Pace. I loved your comment, by the way, on the Hangar Queen. As an aviator, that's near and dear to my heart. Hangar Queens come from inefficiencies. When we have parts problems or people problems, we get Hangar Queens. That's what we have right now. I couldn't agree with you more.
Well, thank you. I think one of the things we need to do, and one of the ways to, going back to inspiring the workforce and to keep them sort of focused, is to give them real and tangible things to go do. When you do flight test, when you do hardware, it kind of drives out nonsense. It doesn't clog up the system when you're actually sort of working and flying. And we put a lot of nonsense in the way of people getting their jobs done. And so the reason why we have acquisition issues is because we often prioritize our bureaucratic processes over and above the mission. The mission takes, secondary to making sure the paperwork is filled out directly. You'll have tons and tons of specification documents, disclosures, and so forth on, cost-plus contracts. All of it's there and required. It's built in. But you really asked, is this really adding value? I think one of the things that I would worry about both on the NASA side and on the DoD side is that we're not able to take advantage of the innovation that's there and potentially available for us in the private sector because people really won't want to work with us. You look at the number of companies that sell to the commercial sector versus selling almost exclusively to DoD. In the past, during back in the 90s or something, prior to the 90s, companies would sell to both government and industry. Today, there's an increasing number of the larger companies that sell really only to the government. And so there's been kind of a separation in the U.S. industrial base and the economy. We need to sort of take down those barriers to where private companies are more willing to partner and work with the U.S. so we can get that innovation that we need.
And you would agree that the private sector is vastly outpacing our capabilities in the government sector?
I would say there are some tremendous capabilities in the government sector that don't exist in the private sector. Okay, but the innovation that the private sector is able to do is because they don't have the other burdens that government carries with it. So there are really some smart, capable...
You're talking about regulation. I couldn't agree with you more.
Regulatory relief and acquisition streamlining is probably one of the most important things common to both defense and NASA's.
And that's been holding us back both in private and government space exploration.
In a world that is much more innovative and moving much faster than it ever did before.
I got about 30 seconds for you to wrap us up, sir.
Well, I think to pull a thread a little bit further, I think actually if you give the leadership and the team at NASA and in government a little bit more leeway to go do their job, they will go do it. I have seen firsthand examples inside the agency, and I lived it myself, where given the right leeway, given the right motivation, and given the right resources, we went off and accomplished things. Vertical landing before it became commercial can actually be done in the government and can be done quickly if given the right leeway.
I couldn't agree, and just a summary point, Mr. Chair, is that basically when people who are doing the hard work are left alone because they want to be safe. I want to survive my mission. If we're left alone to actually accomplish our missions, we'll be the safest people alive. But if you overregulate us, you overburden us, we will fall behind, and this is a global competition. Thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And with that, I recognize Representative from California, Mr. Whitesides, for his 5 minutes of questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to working with you as well as Ranking Member Fushi. It's so good to be here for this first meeting. I also want to say I'm looking forward to working with Ranking Member Lofgren and Chair Babin. I also want to call out somebody who's been to space here in this hearing, which is Pam Melroy, former astronaut and deputy administrator. We're thankful for your service for the nation and for all you've done, so thank you, Pam. I want to recognize the witnesses. I think, Dan, your leadership in engineering and your work at AIA is super important for the nation. And Scott, I think your tenure as executive secretary was one of the best run periods of space policy, and so I want to recognize you both. I want to start by sending a message to the NASA employees out there, which is that we hear you, we support you. As you said, Dan, people are scared, and I think we as a committee have a strong interest in a workforce that is supported, that feels able to conduct its mission, and that is not running scared. And so I know that I have been getting many messages from folks who feel under attack. They don't know if they're going to get fired after we have a confirmation of the next administrator. This is not the situation that is conducive to expanding our leadership in human spaceflight. And so to those folks, I want to say we're going to do everything we can to support you, and we are going to do everything we can to build an agency that continues to do great things. I'm particularly concerned for the NASA centers in my area, NASA Armstrong and JPL. We've had various folks who are already affected by the different employee actions that the administration has pursued, and of course, we're very concerned about the specter of probationary firings. So let's start there. Dan, you talked about this a bit in your testimony. Now, probationary employees are sometimes people who have been promoted, but often they are the younger generation. How important is the next generation to pursuing an ambitious space exploration program?
The next generation is absolutely critical because they need to replace old guys like me. That's going to be the long-term talent, and it takes time to build the talent. We are talking about dealing and addressing the challenges that human beings have not addressed until this generation. The combination of the private enterprise power, capability, the combination of the government and academic communities is critical, and the young people are our future. And getting them and bringing along young people throughout our society to tap into that talent we haven't tapped into in the past is absolutely essential for this global competition we're in.
Thanks a lot. All right, so next question, and I think this is potentially an issue where we can keep returning to, is the issue of risk. And, you know, if we are to compete with the Chinese, which we absolutely need to, and if we are to just do anything, because we've been trying to go beyond low Earth orbit for over 50 years, with humans, I think we need to look at our nation's risk posture. And that is going to be a national conversation that we need to have. There's the old phrase that failure is not an option. And I think that has been toxic to America's space program, because the reality is that if you're trying to do hard things, you're going to fail sometimes. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone is safe on board. And we need to make sure that we're pursuing a structure that enables us to take smart risk. And so I was wondering, Scott, if you might want to talk to that, or Dan, you both have a lot of experience in it.
Well, let me start, since Scott let me. I look at the statement as failure is not an option when I have people on board. Failure is an option when I'm on the test stand trying to understand the limits, and I'm trying to figure out where those limits are so that I can protect the people that are on board that launch vehicle or in that spacecraft. I think risk, we have become more risk averse over time. Our workforce has essentially been, on the human spaceflight side, has been hired since Challenger and Columbia, where failure is not an option has been the mantra. Science community has an ability to learn how to go through these programs in the full life cycle. We have not had that opportunity as much on the human spaceflight side, and our workforce needs to have those opportunities and those flight tests and flying hardware, like Scott alluded to earlier, so that we can get that experience and get that capability rebuilt.
Thanks. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now recognize our chairman from Texas, Dr. Babin, for his 5 minutes. You're recognized, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Pace, Congress directed NASA to establish the Moon to Mars Program Office as part of the last NASA Authorization Act signed into law. The Aerospace Safety Advisory Panels, ASAPs, most recent report recommended that, and I quote, NASA would benefit from formalizing a Design Reference Mission, or a DRM, for Artemis to define the concept of operations. A DRM is a detailed conceptual framework that outlines how a mission will be conducted, specifying objectives, the systems involved, and operational processes. Your testimony states NASA needs an integrated exploration campaign plan with detailed systems engineering for a simpler, more sustainable architecture. How could a design reference mission inform such a campaign plan?
Thank you. That's a great question. And first of all, and thank you to the Congress for creating the Moon to Mars Program Office. I think that was amazingly helpful. It produced more integration across the different elements. And so hopefully you'll have someone from the Moon to Mars Program Office testify maybe at a future session. I hope that is, because I think there's some great people there. I would say the DRMs would be very helpful. Design reference missions were created for the Space Shuttle. There were about 4 of them that the program was designed around. When we did the Artemis program, got it started during the first Trump administration, one of the things that I wanted was a 3-ring binder with a bunch of design reference missions in it to say what was going to actually happen. So I think NASA has done a lot of great work thinking about its architectures and variations in it, but for the really immediate term, having a set of design reference missions to organize your campaign plan around, I think, would be very helpful. And I think the Moon to Mars Program Office is something that could probably do that.
Okay, thank you. 10 years ago, a National Research Council report titled Pathways to Exploration stated the human spaceflight program in the United States had experienced considerable programmatic turbulence with frequent and dramatic changes in program goals and mission plans in response to changes in national policies. The changes had a high cost in program resources and opportunities and imposed what many feared was an intolerable burden on already constrained human exploration budgets. A later ASAP report stated that NASA faces another challenge that has historically led to disruption and inefficiency and arguably has impact on safety and good systems engineering. This is the challenge of starting over with new programs and directions following administration change. As in prior reports, the ASAP urges constancy of purpose. Failing to stay the course with current programs of record will make it an even longer, costlier, and potentially less safe trip to Mars. Another ASAP report once again expressed this sentiment by stating the ASAP, it reiterates the need for consistent program goals, funding, and schedules, also known as constancy of purpose. Human space flight and exploration are inherently challenging and risky and require far-reaching, long-term national commitment to capitalize on painstakingly achieved knowledge and to realize the results of resource investments. The lack of consistent commitment negatively impacts cost, schedule, and performance, workforce morale, process discipline, and, most importantly, safety. Mr. Dumbacher, to address this issue, President Trump issued Space Policy Directive No. 1 during his first administration that maintained constancy of purpose and reaffirmed NASA's goal to return to the Moon. Can you speak, please, to continuity of purpose at this stage of the Artemis program?
Absolutely. I'm happy to. Thank you, Chairman Babin, for that question. And I will also highlight that the National Academy's report you referred to, I use in my class for the students on purpose. Because that constancy of purpose that has been demonstrated from SPD-1, the NASA Authorization Acts, the bicameral, bipartisan support is absolutely critical on the execution side. That purpose, knowing what the target is and continuing towards that target is critical. The funding and the resources have to come with it. But first is the purpose. It helps keep people aligned. It helps keep people knowing where we're going. what the roadmap looks like and where we're eventually headed. Constancy of purpose doesn't mean I can't change down the road. As new capabilities come online, I need to be flexible. I need to take the opportunity. As new private enterprise capabilities come in, I need to be able to include those and maybe get rid of some things and bring in new. That's okay, but the purpose is still the same. I still have the constancy of purpose, and if I still have the resources, we can go make it happen.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time. I may submit this last question for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Next, I recognize the representative from Oregon, Ms. Salinas, for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chair Herodopoulos and Ranking Member Fushi, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My district includes multiple NASA contractors and subcontractors for the Artemis program. Companies like Blue Origin, Axiom, and others support a vibrant ecosystem of small businesses that contribute key components to NASA missions. From machinists like Machine Sciences and Tresky to electronics and software companies like Mentor Graphics and TimberCon, Oregon's 6th district really is a hub for this kind of work. Can you expand on the value of engaging a broad aerospace supply chain, and how does it affect the cost of Artemis programs? And more broadly, what are the implications for America's economic competitiveness?
The industrial, Congresswoman, that's an excellent question, and thank you. It highlights a very important point that it's not just scientists and engineers, it's the entire workforce that's needed to go make this happen. The industrial base, as we've seen it, has been weakened over time. We have to build it back, and major programs like Artemis and what we do on the national security side are facing those challenges every single day. It is critical that we get the skilled technical labor that builds this hardware, that turns the ideas into reality, get them brought along. It's just as important as other members on the team. And we have to continue to build that. We build it by doing things. We do it by building hardware, by flying missions, by making things happen. We don't build the industrial base by talking about it.
Thank you, I agree. So, of course, these small suppliers hire local talent and support good jobs in my community. And when I've had the opportunity to meet with these workers, it's inspired me how inspired they are to play a role in a literal moonshot. And last Congress, I introduced a resolution to establish July 20th, the anniversary of the first Apollo moon landing, as National Moon Day, because the importance of this inspirational quality of these missions, I don't think, should be overlooked. Space exploration is something that brings Americans together, and it truly inspires young people to pursue careers that are critical to our economy and to technological advancements that benefits all of society. So what specifically should we be doing to better leverage NASA's space exploration and science missions to inspire children to pursue careers in STEM and ensure Artemis can similarly bring Americans together and inspire us for generations?
Well, I have a lot of students, of course, who come to university who want to get involved in space, sort of obviously engineering and policy and economics and so forth. But I think what Dr. Dumbacher was saying about we need all kinds of people to build things. You know, down in Texas, you have steel workers building spaceships. Mm-hmm. I mean, how really cool is that? As we have new levels of technology, additive manufacturing, more flexible production lines, we want to be able to tap everybody in the U.S. economy who can potentially contribute. And so when we have regulatory burdens that get in the way of that, there's really then not that opportunity. So we inspire students and young people by saying, here's something you can work on. But then we have to follow through and say, and by the way, the company you work for that's able to do this competes on the strength of what it produces, not on its ability to fill out the paperwork. And so opening up more opportunities for competition then makes that dream of participation a reality. So the two really go together, both the education part and seemingly dull things like regulatory reform.
Thank you. And so I just, so I think it goes hand in hand, and I know we've talked a bit about this. So building on that, recent reports have indicated that approximately 5% of NASA's workforce took that fork in the road. Deferred resignation offer and additional layoffs could be in the works, and NASA has canceled programs aimed at engaging diverse populations. So I want to make sure to be very clear about, you know, giving that inspiration, but then being realistic. How will these actions from the Trump administration affect career opportunities for early career professionals in aerospace space fields in the short term, and what are the long-term workforce implications?
Well, I'll go ahead and reiterate some points made at the full committee hearing on February 5th, that the less uncertainty, the better. And that people need to see the opportunity for their careers. They need to see how it benefits them. They need to know it's stable. And they want to know that they're working on real problems and real challenges that matter. So I think making sure we do that is critical, and continue to build it so that we get the real work done. The turmoil that is occurring now is causing people to question. And these are bright people that we need for the long haul. And what we are doing is inadvertently slowing down our ability for them to learn, because they're worried about their future, and we're not over here doing and learning. So we need to get them back to the doing and learning.
Thank you so much. My time has expired. I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the representative from Texas, Mr. Self, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am new to this committee, so as I try to prepare, I wanted to go back to, in my reading, George W. Bush in 2004 said we would go to the moon by 2020. Well, immediately after that, we had President Obama, who canceled programs, who, I think you mentioned Mars. I think there was an asteroid in there. Real simple question. How many years did the Obama destruction of this program cost us? Here we are in 2025. George W. Bush said we'd go to the moon by 2020. How many years are we now into delay because of the Obama cancellations of programs and distractions about asteroids and Mars? Simple question. How many years delay? Y'all have been at this far longer than I have. What's your expert assessment?
We were hoping to be on the moon by 2024, so I would say certainly 20 years, if not more. I would say maybe a decade or so lost. There was progress, I would say, during the Obama administration on some things. Commercial crew.
I just asked you one question, sir.
I would say about a decade.
A decade. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Dumbacher. Dr. Dumbacher.
Congressman, I'll put it in the category of probably about 5 years, given what we had to go from the transition of Constellation to what's now Artemis, and what it took us, that dip down and that restart was critical. But I would say 5 years, and then it's been a matter of how we've executed since then.
Yeah, thank you for that. Dr. Dumbacher, you said that 2030 is remote at best. I've heard a lot about speed here from the two of you, and you've been at this a long time. We've heard about the Chinese discipline in their, and I think what I'm getting from the two of you is you expect them to meet 2030. Yeah. So in every committee that I belong to, I hear a lot about inputs. We do this, we fund this, we study this, the outputs is what almost every committee I'm more interested in than the inputs. The outputs. So simple question to the two of you, how do we get to 2030? So talk about maybe commercial versus NASA. How do we get to 2030? Because if we've lost this decade, 5 years to decade, how do we now get to our how do we get there?
Excellent question, Congressman, and I will tell you it's a topic of debate, but I'll give you my opinion.
Sure.
My opinion, my hopefully informed opinion, is number one, I take advantage of the hardware I already have in the barn, and the hardware available in Artemis 2 and 3 to go make it happen. Number two is I get myself a simplified lander so that I can get to the moon that does not require multiple launches. My 40 number comes from demonstrating it twice. I have to do the whole mission twice, once uncrewed and then crewed. Right. I need to get that number of launches dramatically reduced. I need to go simple. So use the hardware I have available. I have to go get a small new lander to go do that. Okay. And this is another important part, I have to give the team at NASA and industry, the laser focus and the urgency to make sure that I only deal with what I need to deal with. I cut back on the administrivia that they may be dealing with, dial back the risk aversion like we've talked a little bit about, so that that team has the leeway to go accomplish the mission objectives, utilizing what we have available, and then go figure out what I do beyond that for the long-term sustainability.
Dr. Pace.
I think that's right. If I would simply only add one thing to that, is something overlooked is communications and navigation. The Chinese are sending up relay satellites now for communicating and operating around the moon. We have our own systems set up. There's going to be international conferences in the next 2 years looking at confirming the frequencies where we're going to be operating at. So the ability to navigate, create infrastructure in and around the moon is going to precede whether or not humans land there. It's not going to be like the old days for Apollo. And so shaping that infrastructure, those decisions are happening really right now. And so faster progress on communications, navigation, flying, some of these experiments. I could go into some more other technical details if you want. But I think getting the organization back to where it's flying more routinely builds a culture. You can't just tell people, go take more risk. Right. They have to have some experience doing that. We've got to give them opportunities for flying. And as I said, just go do it.
My time is up, but I will point out we've heard regulations, we've heard risk aversion, so that's Congress's duty. How do we cut down on the regulations and the risk aversion? I will yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the representative from Michigan, Ms. Stevens, for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you so much, and it's a delight that it's February 26th, and I'm finally speaking in a science committee hearing. You know, we've got a lot of important topics here, and Chair Herodopoulos, we want to welcome and congratulate you to Congress. You're filling big shoes with Mr. Posey, who we loved serving with on this committee, and we deeply care about the U.S. space race. And of course, it's also a delight to have Mr. Babin as our chair, so Lofgren still in her role, Mr. Whiteside's here, we got Salinas. I love all these people. You know, we're a collective committee. But as I was thinking about this topic of ours, and as someone who is very dedicated representative for Michigan, obviously we've got a strong automotive ecosystem, manufacturing sector. A lot of it is diversified into the supply chain of space and our grand competition. I just can't remember when we were last as a Congress talking about a space race, and maybe that was, you know, we did the 50-year anniversary of landing on the moon when I was in my first term. That was in 2019. Now we're a handful of years on. But when we were going into that history, we weren't looking at it from the lens of major cuts to public health. And last night we just passed, not me, but we saw the majority unanimously, nearly unanimously, vote to pass a budget resolution that would cut $880 billion potentially for Medicaid for people. And I look at that and I think, holy smokes. You know, we want to win the race to the future. I got a lot of technical questions for you guys. Maybe I'll have to submit them as questions for the record, but I just wonder how we can be competitive and successful in this area when we can't give people the benefits they've earned. When we look at families with children who have medically complex challenges, and we're going to say you're not going to have your health care. And I look, I don't often bring up health care in this committee. I mean, we've been passing CHIPS bills and science bills up the wazoo. Building Blocks of STEM Act was signed by President Trump into law on December 24, 2019. And that was an equity bill. It was my bill with Dr. Jim Baird and some partners in the Senate. But I just think this is really important to bring up here, because if we're really going to lead as a nation, what we see and what I know that's happening back home reminds me of what was happening when COVID hit. You got a efficiency effort, which is important because we want the best efficiency. The last hearing we had on the Space Subcommittee before the end of the last term, Chairman, you weren't here yet, but it was really important. I mean, we're looking at the bureaucracy driving us crazy in terms of sending people into outer space. And we love the idea of getting more people to the moon. It's inspiring, it's aspirational, and it's important to our technology. But I don't know if we can do it at the expense of people back home having heart palpitations if their school is still going to have special education, when people aren't going to be able to work. And these are my workers in Michigan. You have to, I mean, I got a company called Detroit Flex. They make these great tubes that go into the engines. They were selling into automotive for years and years, and then one of these amazing commercial space companies, you know, has access to it. So I think that's how I wanted to use my 5 minutes here, is to make that point in this audience of very dedicated individuals who are tied in to this Artemis, which I don't want this program to flop. I wish we were talking about ways in which we could effectively use the dollar to keep it going, to trim our bureaucracy, to make us more efficient, to have leadership. But what I'm hearing from home is you got a government that feels really unstable right now. And we're trustees of that government. We're all, you know, everyone at this dais is an elected trustee of that government. So I'll be submitting the more technical questions for the record, and I thank you, gentlemen, for your previous service and your time here today, and I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the representative from California, Mr. Fong, for his 5 minutes of questions. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for hosting this important hearing today. Look forward to working with you on this committee. First, I want to highlight my community's contributions to the Artemis program, specifically at the Air Force Research Laboratories Rocket Lab at Edwards Air Force Base. Blue Origin and the Air Force have established a partnership where Blue Origin is able to use certain Air Force facilities to test Blue Origin's BE-7 engines. This helps ensure the Artemis program is successful, but also leverages the private sector's speed and innovation. And to meet the challenges ahead, our nation needs more public and private partnerships so that we can work together to achieve great things. I did want to ask, both of you, in your testimonies, you described the global competition, the need to act with a sense of urgency for America to win this space race, especially with the competition coming from China. You described some of the importance you described the importance of leadership in space exploration in terms of our U.S. economic, national security, and scientific interests. In light of my colleague's just statement before, maybe we can take a step back. Can you outline the importance to everyday Americans why we need to engage, why we need to win this new space race?
Well, I think at a very high level, and part of it's academic, is we need to win it in order to make sure the environment we depend on. Space is critical to our economy. Space is critical to our military. And if we're second in space, then we're second in being able to shape a domain that our life depends on. You can just imagine the number of ways you use space every day, everything from your GPS to your evening news, to your weather predictions, to your electrical power systems, all these things that we have an infrastructure that we depend on. So we need to protect the space environment. We need to make sure the rules are there that are conducive to our interests. But at another level, more at home in the United States in industry, space is the most important school you can go to. That is, in order to master things in space, you have to master pretty much every aspect of technology and science to do well. And then to bring that all together into a mission that involves humans is even more driving. So it is something that drives your education, that drives your ability to manage large-scale systems. It drives manufacturing. It drives the ability to get people inspired to the next generation. If you look at what China is doing in space, it's for a number of reasons that are fairly self-evident. They want more influence. They want to drive their industry. They want to inspire their own population. And they want to gain skills so they can dominate in other technical fields, not illogical reasons. And so we are in a large-scale competition and struggle in the world, and space is one of those things that gives us the tools necessary to win.
So I couldn't agree more. America has to win this space race. You in your testimony mentioned that our missions can't be one and done. They have to be repeatable and sustainable. And you've kind of touched on the regulatory burdens. You've touched on barriers. You've touched on acquisition streamlining. I did want to ask specifically if there were specific regulations or specific provisions that you could mention, if we can dive into the weeds a little bit, that we need to examine. And I don't know if there's a level of tiers of priority that you would highlight. And that goes to both of you, if both of you want to answer that.
I think I'm sure we could bore everyone in the room by tearing down some of the regs. I think the number one thing that I would say is to push responsibility down and to the agencies and hold them accountable. Don't have a one-size fits all. Take a scalpel, not just a grenade, to those things, and give the agencies both the leadership direction and the top cover necessary to go and experiment. I think, as Dr. Dumbacher said, we can actually do a lot of amazing things in getting stuff done if people think that they're not going to be penalized for trying and doing that. So I think agency accountability, I think pressing things down to a lower level in the agencies, and I think those might be questions that will come up in Mr. Isaacman's confirmation hearing.
And Congressman, I'm fully with Dr. Pace's answer. I think we're having the right kind of conversations about regulation for human spaceflight and other things via the FAA activities and some of the others that I've been familiar with, and we're working through that. And I think we need to, as Scott has said, give people the leeway and hold them accountable to go experiment, and this nation can accomplish great things.
I want to thank you for your testimony and guidance. My time's run out, but this is critically important, especially I think we need to tell the story of how our lives, our daily lives, are impacted with space, and how we need to continue to invest and continue to be dominant in this arena, especially with the competition that comes from China. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. I recognize the representative from New York, Ms. Gillen, for her 5 minutes of questions.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Mike Haradopoulos, my new fellow freshman, and thank you to Ranking Member Fushi, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm very much looking forward to working together in a bipartisan manner with my colleagues on the subcommittee to strengthen the American leadership in space. Mr. Dumbacher, as you know, the United States and China are in a race to get our astronauts back on the moon, which has enormous stakes for our national security. I'm very concerned that because China uses its space program to conceal military intentions under the guise of research, what are the consequences for our national security if U.S. and for the United States if China is the first to land crewed mission or even establish a lab on the moon?
Well, again, as we've discussed, it's about the presence. It's about being there, and by being there, that's how you establish your value system, your leadership, and the rules of the road for our nation. I think it's absolutely critical. It's also critical even from a technical perspective and a programmatic perspective, because we want to be the ones to help figure out the technologies that are so critical, not just for what Artemis needs and what NASA needs, but also for what our national security, U.S. Space Force, and others are going to require. On-orbit propellant depots, communications, power, position nav and tracking, all of that, we want to be in the forefront so that we can build it, and for the policy reasons of establishing the rules of the road via our presence.
Thank you. And just to follow up, earlier in your testimony, you talked about making sure that Congress gives you the funding you need to maintain and have our space program excel. And making sure that we have the best and the brightest involved in our space program. I'm curious, we're lucky enough to have folks like my colleague beside me, Mr. Whitesides, who is a leader in our space program. What can Congress do to make sure that we have a pipeline of real talent to get our program where it needs to be and to be the future of space?
I would point out it's been more than 20 years since the Congress passed the 2004 NASA workforce bill, which produced some liberalization, allowing people to come in, some more flexibilities. I think a topic for the next administrator is a new NASA workforce bill to look at how maybe people can go more easily to industry, from industry back in to government in a disciplined sort of way. There's been a lot of changes, and I know Dr. Dumbacher from his AIAA experience. I think if that gets folded into a NASA authorization bill, great, but I think re-looking at the NASA workforce bill after 20 years might be a good use.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the representative from Utah, Dr. Kennedy, for his 5 minutes of questions. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be with you and with this committee. It's very exciting. Thank you to the witnesses for being here to consider us going to the moon and beyond. So in the state of Utah, Northrop Grumman's state-of-the-art facilities are central to the development of solid rocket boosters for some of the most ambitious missions we've embarked upon. These boosters are key to propelling spacecraft like NASA's Space Launch System, which is set to carry astronauts deeper into space than ever before, including the planned missions to the moon under the Artemis program and eventually to Mars. So, Mr. Dumbacher, if you would help me, how will the Artemis technology and knowledge for the moon mission be leveraged for future missions to Mars and beyond?
Well, the technology that we do for the moon is essential for being able to go to Mars because, one, we're going to learn from a technology perspective, the transportation systems, as you've mentioned, the communication, the power, the nav. We need to realize something. Going to the moon, I'm days away from home. Going to Mars, I'm months away. It's 240,000 miles versus 35 million. So I have to learn not just the technical, how to do the communications, how to do the power, how to do the environmental control and life support. I also have to learn how to do the operations. I have to learn where the decision-making needs to be because of the time delays in the communication. And that the astronauts will have to react on site and not be able to have as much help from home because of the time delay. I need to work through all of that. And I do that by operating at the moon, going through the new mission scenarios, and then eventually going out to Mars with that knowledge. My analogy for it is I don't take my Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts out to the Grand Canyon on their first camping trip. I take them to the local backyard, state park, and then I might go out to the local national park before I take them to the Grand Canyon. It's the same kind of thing, where we need to learn along the way, and the moon is that stepping stone for us so that we can learn how to do those things and then go to Mars.
Thank you for that answer. And Dr. Pace, if I can ask you this question, we're in the state of Utah privileged to have the Space Dynamics Laboratory at Utah State University. The SDL's talented workforce includes scientists, engineers, and business professionals dedicated to providing solutions that support all mission phases from concept to completion. Utah State has been working closely with NASA on the robotics portion of Artemis. One of the programs they are working on with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab is specifically a heterodyne OH lunar miniature spectrometer, go ahead and say that 3 times fast, looking for water on the moon, which is an important function associated with manned missions. There are some major challenges that need to be overcome to go to Mars. Some close to the administration have publicly advocated for going straight to Mars, bypassing the moon, dismissing it, since we have already been there. So my question is this a serious consideration by the administration, or will the moon continue to be the immediate focus?
Well, since I'm in academia, I really can't speak for the administration, on these things. I would say that I would look to the guidance that the Congress has already laid out. I would look to the existing space policy in SPD1 and space policy for 2020 that's still there. And I would look to the logic of, what we need to do to succeed. So I think it's fine for people to push and say, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? Not simply to take things as a given. So I think responding to those questions is perfectly fine. But I think the stepping stone approach that this Congress has done over a few decades still remains the right direction.
Thank you, and thank you for not speaking for the administration. There's a lot on the left that seem to want to speak for the administration on a regular basis about what's happening around here, but I appreciate your restraint in holding off on that. A follow-up question on that: if the moon continues to be a focus, will emphasis be placed on the manned or robotic part of Artemis, or will it be a balanced portfolio? And either one of you, if you have an opinion about that, I'm open to it.
I think, Congressman, my thoughts on that are that it needs to be the balanced program, because I need to go figure out where the resources are, how much is there, and I can do a lot of this robotically, and the proper synergy between a robotic program and the human program is how we get to the best benefit. I send the scouts out robotically, and then I bring the humans. And I think the balanced portfolio is the proper answer.
Thanks. I love the scout analogy. I enjoyed being a Boy Scout myself, and it sounds like you're doing good work for the young, which actually is my final question. Is we've had 2 Utah student teams in the past 2 years who were funded under the Big Idea Challenge, which has a yearly theme to contribute to the future of the Artemis program with specific challenges in lunar operations. The 2024 Big Idea team was from Brigham Young University, my alma mater times 2, and they developed an untethered and modular inflatable robot for lunar operations. What can NASA do to enhance academic partnerships which contribute to our mission to go to the moon, Mars, and beyond? What, in your opinion, do you think about that?
I think I will actually point to the Office of STEM Engagement at NASA has done a tremendous job over the last several years. Strategically and all the way through implementation of growing that capability. They have done a masterful job of marshaling the resources, doing it efficiently and quickly. And right now their hindrance is funding that's holding them back from being able to do more. We just need to do more.
Thank you for those answers. My time has expired, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Kenny. I know we're waiting for Mrs. Rivas. She's on her way, understanding? Congresswoman from California. We'll give her a little time. No problem. I now recognize Representative from California, Ms. Rivas, for her 5 minutes of question. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to wave on to today's hearing in your Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee. I have deep concerns about the Trump administration's attacks on our federal workforce and how it will impact NASA and the Artemis campaign. Just outside my district is NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The space workforce in and around my district understand the disruption and difficulty of layoffs in the space sector all too well after JPL laid off almost 850 people last year. Any reduction to the space workforce will negatively impact our communities, our future, and our country's competitiveness. In fact, it was the team at JPL that brought a methane leak in my district to the public's attention in 2020. JPL's report, which used airborne sensors to observe methane sources, found that the station in my district had been leaking more than 10,000 cubic feet of methane per hour for the last couple of years, equivalent to the emissions of 30,000 cars. The administration's proposed NASA firings and federal funding freeze will negatively affect NASA centers and federally funded research and development centers like JPL by cutting science programs and missions that are in operation, inhibiting NASA's ability to push innovative boundaries. Mr. Dumbacher, in your opening statement, you talk about how our workforce must be nurtured and how our strength is being able to bring out the best minds from across the country. In your experience in the space engineering industry, what will happen to our nation's progress if the current administration continues to move forward with their plans to reduce the space workforce and their continued insistence on the removal of the word inclusion as a core value of NASA?
our workforce, the national asset that we have built and invested over time, requires one, to know that there is stability for their careers and for their lives. And by us continuing in the bicameral, bipartisan way that this Congress and SPD1 and other things have set the constancy of purpose, that's an important element. Then the funding has to come to go execute the programs. And what's important for our workforce is for them to see that they have real challenges, real problems to go solve, and they'll go do it. And then they will learn, and our society will reap the benefits. That's the important part. And we also have to realize that in this global competition, we need to tap all of the resources across this country to be able to compete with others. Just because China has a larger population than we do, we graduate 10 to 20% of the number of engineers on an annual basis at the undergraduate level compared to the Chinese. We're not going to win the numbers game. What we need to do is get the perspective, the talent, and tap into those communities that we haven't tapped into before to help make sure we're bringing all of the talent to bear across this country.
Thank you. I agree. You know, as you may know, I'm the only Latina in Congress who is an engineer. I'm also the co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional STEM Education Caucus. And, you know, ensuring that all Americans, especially women and girls of color, can see the first woman and the first person of color land on the moon is essential to the vision of this campaign. Your written opening statement mentioned that only 10% of our engineering graduates are Hispanic. In your view, what needs to be done to improve this number?
What I've learned, Congresswoman, is that number one, they have to see the opportunity, and they have to see themselves as being able to accomplish that opportunity, and they see it through their mentors and people like them that are the astronauts, are the program managers, are the engineers, are the scientists, even the attorneys. And they need to see that capability, and then their networks, their support structure, their families, their friends, their relatives need to also understand the opportunity and see that as an opportunity to help build it. And then we also need to help them through their educational journey, because it's a challenge, and it always will be. And we need to help them through that, at the end, making sure that they see the opportunity and the real challenges and the real problems they get to solve.
Thank you. You know, as you can tell, these issues are personal for me, for my state, for my district. I agree that, you know, family, teachers, educators all need to be part of the solution. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I believe Congressman Collins is en route, so I'll give him a little bit of time, as we did for Congresswoman Rivas as well.
Thank you.
I now recognize the representative from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Goodness. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate you giving me a few minutes to get in here. Somehow, I've only been coming here 2 years, but I got lost. Anybody figure Rayburn? No. I kind of wanted to tee off of a couple things that y'all were saying in your opening testimony, and I also want to kind of intertwine that with the hearing that we had yesterday in natural resources, because I think they kind of go hand in hand. And as far as my background, I'm a small business person, been an entrepreneur all my life, and just started this in the 118th Congress. So I like to look at things from a small business and entrepreneurship type of frame. And I know in today's age that we are in a different light, as the chairman said, just not productivity and efficiency, but saving the American taxpayer money, being productive, but yet being efficient at the same time. And we know that Artemis has had a few setbacks and a few problems. But I just want to go and take a look at what's out there and what's available and where the world is going. And yesterday, when we had our hearing, there were two companies there, and I don't know if y'all may not know them or may know them. One of them was Astroforge, who is doing deep space exploration, and the other one is StarPath. And StarPath, I thought, had a really unique look on what they're simply a mining company. And we're talking about mining critical minerals and in this case, rocket propellant fuel. And their whole niche was to make it cheaper to get to the moon and back. In their words, they were going to be a gas station on the moon. You know, the rocket ship, SpaceX, whoever comes, lands, NASA comes and lands, and while they're doing their business, people like StarPath will check the tires, the oil, and fill them up with propellant fuel to get them back, which we all know would save weight and save fuel. And so what I kind of want to, and I guess, Dr. Pace, I'll ask you this question, and then I want to ask both of you the same thing. But, you know, because NASA programs, they often do struggle with staying on schedule and staying on budget. And so what is needed? And I can go over some other examples on some other committees where we do appropriations every year for the same project, and it just gets really crazy because it doesn't work. But what are some realistic budget, program architectural things within NASA that may help?
Sure. I think something that was done in the last Trump administration, we were trying to get the NASA budget up to roughly where it was at the end of the Cold War. And if we had the same budget power today that we did around 1992, the NASA budget would be $30 to $33 billion. So there's been a long-term decline in the NASA budget over time. When talking about that, the pushback that I got was, great, happy to see more money going to NASA, but show me where the innovation is. Give me something that's innovative and new, not just another program of record. I mean, that was really the challenge. So I think if you're challenging NASA to say, okay, you need more resources, first tell me, how are you going to do this in a more sort of innovative kind of way? I think one of the ways you save money is by thinking about those things that only the government can do versus those things the private sector can do. Just like we have a U.S. Geological Survey to go out and do some basic information, I think that NASA has a role in doing basic science, understanding what resources might be there on the moon. But as soon as possible, transition over to where NASA simply buys those resources, buys it as a service from these kind of commercial companies. So the way you do it, one is by pushing for innovation, and two, making sure that NASA only does those things that really only the government can do. And if at all possible to give the private sector a shot, they should get that shot.
So I'm going to come from my personal experience. Scott just said the things that NASA ought to be doing when they're doing them, do it with the right size team, with a team that has the leeway to go execute on that program and has the discipline to manage that program and to make it happen on the schedule and to meet the technical objectives. I have personal experience that I managed personally and had a small team that delivered on the objectives, on schedule, 10% under budget. And it was the first vertical landing rocket that this country had done, and that workforce then went to SpaceX and Blue Origin. It can be done with the right discipline. the right people, the right leeway, and the right discipline.
Right, and I would agree with you. And I think that's where I was alluding to, like even with StarPath. Have I burned 5 minutes? Holy cow. I knew I talked slow being from the South, and I think that's where I was going with things like StarPath. I mean, they're talking about they could potentially be on the moon by 2026. That's their goals, and to set up and start mining. And anytime you can take a public, and I didn't know what else you saw out there, public-private partnerships that might be available that we need to be looking at from up here. So, well, I'm out of time. I see that. I had another question, but
Well,
that's
thank you,
okay.
Congressman Collins. All right, and with that, that is all of our members here today. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and candid opinions as well. Thank you. I want to also thank the members for their thoughtful questions, and I look forward to working with my ranking member as we proceed this year. I appreciate the thoughtful comments today, and the record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Hey, man, y'all cut me. I saw my clock go down to 1 minute.
I don't know what you're talking about.